Well, good afternoon. I'm Ann Hogan. I'm Dean of the College of Performing Arts in the Musco Center for the Arts here at Chapman University. And we are so excited for this evening's performance of Hymn of the Art by the Darshan Trio. I'm here on the stage of the Musco with the Darshan Trio. Welcome. We have Vijay Gupta on violin, Dominic Cheli on piano, and Yoshika Masuda on cello. And I should note that Yoshi, as we call him, is also an assistant professor of cello and head of string studies here at Chapman University. I am so grateful for you on the afternoon of your performance to do a presentation for us as part of our Musco Connects initiative. Really excited to learn more about you as an ensemble and the work that you do. So thank you very much. And
thank you, Ann.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's a joy to be here. Thank you so much for having us. We're the Darshan Piano Trio. And just to explain what Darshan means, Darshan is a Hindi or a Sanskrit word which means vision, seeing. So, you're kind of seeing us on stage in this gorgeous space right now. And that can be a kind of darshan. But darshan also implies a kind of spiritual seeing. It's the seeing of the divine. It's the beholding of something transcendent in one another. And so the way that we think about making music together is to capture and embody that possibility of transcendence. And so we think about how when we play for you, we want you to come away with the kind of seeing beyond seeing and a hearing beyond hearing. And this kind of practice came to us as part of the work we do as part of an organization called Street Symphony, which is a nonprofit organization that I founded in 2011. At the time, I was a member of the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra, but I was also very keen on bringing music to people who I felt wouldn't have access to gorgeous spaces like this, spaces where culture, quote unquote, culture happens, spaces of beauty and transformation. I had a background in neuroscience. I had a bit of study with regards to how music affected the brain, particularly the impact that music had on people experiencing severe brain trauma, whether it was a stroke or an injury to the, certain parts of the brain. But I was also aware of the impact of music on the brains of people who were experiencing dementia or Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease. And so I started cold calling shelters, clinics, county jails, hospitals, even state prisons, asking if I could bring classical music into these spaces. And one of the first places I ever went to was the Patton State Hospital in San Bernardino, about 70 miles east of downtown LA. And I prepared the kind of Mount Everest of pieces for the unaccompanied violin, for the solo violin, which is called the Chaconne by Johann Sebastian Bach. And I'm going to have my colleague Dominic just talk in a moment about the Chaconne, but I showed up for this audience of about 120 inmates at the Patton State Hospital, which is essentially an asylum. It's a place where people are incarcerated who have not been found able to stand trial in the overcrowded LA courts. And I had had a few experiences of quote-unquote outreach in the past, but the kind of quintessential outreach engagement event is that a musician practices and shows up and plays at an audience and then kind of congratulates themselves and leaves, right? And the experience of the audience is not really factored into the experience of the performer. And so I played the Chaconne at my audience. I didn't introduce them to this music. I didn't welcome them into the music. And it was one of those rare instances where as a performer, I thought, oh, this is going well. And I was expecting like a decent round of applause from our audience. And when I finished, no one clapped. And it was just crickets. And it was the first time in my life, having played the violin since I was 4 years old, where I had completely bombed. Because I had not established a sense of connection or trust or seeing with my audience. I just played at them. And one of the people in my audience, an inmate, a black man, stood up and he said, "Son, don't you know any songs we know?" And the first thing that came to my mind was the Titanic theme song. And then immediately Heather could not possibly possibly be something worse to play in a state hospital than the Titanic theme song? And so I just blanked. And he started singing to me. And he sang this song called Jesus on the Main Line. And I didn't know the song, but I learned later on that it was a gospel song. It was a song that was sung during the civil rights marches. It was clearly part of this man's history and his being and his humanity. And in singing back to me, he wasn't saying, don't play Bach. He was saying, do you see me? Do you see me as a person with my own music, with my own culture, with my own relationship to the transcendent divine? And of course, what I have realized, since years of that experience is that Bach himself would have said that Jesus was his main line. And Bach, as a deeply devout Lutheran person, had woven in hymns and prayers and the sacred into nearly every single thing he wrote. And so tonight, the Darshan Piano Trio is going to perform an arrangement of the Bach Chaconne, arranged by our very own pianist, Dominic Cheli. And Dominic is now going to tell you a little bit about how and why he set his arrangement of the Chaconne this way. But before I let go of the microphone, I do want to say that the Darshan Piano Trio is the ensemble in residence for Street Symphony, which on any given month performs at shelters, clinics, at the LA Children's Hospital, across county jails and state prisons and state hospitals. Over the last 16 years, we've presented nearly 3,000 free on-site live musical events for people who at first we've considered as being in some way broken or underserved or who don't have access to what we call art and culture. But the same kind of humbling, perhaps slightly humiliating, but humanizing experience that I had at the Patton State Hospital is something that we have experienced every single time that we have brought the music of Bach or great jazz music or mariachi music or West African drumming. We have a roster of about 90 professional world-class musicians from the LA Philharmonic, LA Master Chorale, musicians like Dominic and Yoshi and myself, who now go to Skid Row as an act of pilgrimage to realize that the very reason we became musicians isn't just to play in gorgeous spaces like this, but to activate the sacred that exists between you and me. So that's our work, and that's what we're going to talk about today. For the sake of this presentation, we're going to call this idea social entrepreneurship. But the truth is that this is really our purpose and our calling, and it's what makes us come alive as musicians wherever we happen to be lucky enough to perform. So Dominic, I'm going to pass the microphone over to you, and then we're going to play some music and then continue the conversation.
Well, thanks so much, Vijay. So this piece, the Chaconne in D minor by Johann Sebastian Bach, is really one of the most titanic and important pieces in the Western canon. And just to kind of set the stage for you, before we play this first part of the piece, I want to share how human Bach would have been. Vijay just shared this very powerful story about how he experienced crickets, in that situation earlier. And unfortunately, even someone as much of a genius as Bach had similar experiences. There's one really powerful story about him walking 400 miles across Germany to go hear the greatest organist of the time, Buxtehude, play recital. And Bach would have gone across this journey, at times maybe even begging for food, trying to make his way, muster the courage and bravery to go up to this great organist and tell him who he was. But he wasn't given the time of day. This was his version of not being seen, not being heard, and frankly just being told, go home where you came from. And he walked 400 miles back. This is really inconceivable for us to think about because Bach is by far one of the greatest composers to ever live, and for many, one of the greatest composers they can think of. But this was an experience that profoundly shaped his music making and his artistry. This Chaconne is a little bit similar in the sense that it's powerful and deeply embedded into his core. You see, when he was actually away traveling, his first wife would have unfortunately passed away. And when he returned home, he would have returned to a gravestone, not to any ceremony, not to any really resolution of this terrible circumstance, but rather just little stone and dirt. And that is really, for a lot of people, where this piece comes from. This is where Bach really, he drew upon his sadness, his grief, his absolution, his resolve to move forward, his hope, and more, all imbued into this music. So in this piece, this piece that I've arranged for piano trio, what I've actually done is embed hymns. These tunes, these songs from cantatas, from chorales that Bach would have been writing all of his life. These are not necessarily creations of my own. These are through the work of the musicologist Helga Thöne, and also just simply looking through the bass line, the harmonic progressions, and more. This is all something that emerges. And you'll be hearing quite a bit of these different types of hymns, actually in the cello part, quite high in the register, beautifully played by Yoshi. This chaconne, it begins this arrangement with a very simple spectral bass line. This is the underpinning for what the entire piece unfolds upon. It's very bare bones, it's very mysterious. We stack from there. We have this piece that's a sort of an ancient dance. It's a dance like it has movement, it has power. And again, these hymns, these really powerful messages from his faith emerge all throughout. So with that, we'll be playing the first part of the chaconne in D minor, arranged by myself for piano trio by Bach.
Okay, so this is just a little sneak preview of our presentation tonight. And it really is bringing up so many memories to perform this piece and to play it here. I actually want to kind of frame the rest of our time together with a question, which is, how do we meet the world in its needs, right? We live in a world that is intensely fractured, a world in which even beginning to ask questions about our purpose and our place in it feels so fraught. And for many of us who might be trained as classical musicians or as artists of any kind, we're constantly asking, well, how does the little thing that I do that takes so much time and so much effort to cultivate, what could that possibly bring to meet the immensity of the world's pain, the world's need? The place where Street Symphony does our work is in the largest community of unhoused people anywhere in America. Skid Row is the epicenter of the crisis of homelessness in America today. It's a place where on any given night, upwards of 80,000 people could be sleeping on the streets of Los Angeles County. So what on earth could a performance of the Bach Chaconne bring to people who are experiencing chronic addiction, homelessness, incarceration, severe mental health issues? And this is one of the serious questions that we'll be answering and hoping to answer as part of the presentation. But I want to give my colleague Yoshi a chance to speak a little bit about an experience that we had bringing music into the women's prison in Chino, not too far away from where we are right now. And just to say hello and chat a little bit about your experiences at Street Symphony.
Sure, yes. So that was actually my very first Street Symphony gig, actually. And, I had no idea what I was going to experience going into that. And, I mean, first of all, I've never been in a prison before. And knowing that we were breathing the same air, yet being inside on the other side of that fence felt so dense. It was just such an experience I've never really experienced before. And going into that hall where we waited for these inmates to come in to sit down and listen to us play, I mean, I was frankly a little bit terrified. You see these people in their jumpsuits, very, stern faces, broken faces, and you clearly can tell they have each a story to tell, but most people you probably didn't want to mess with. And so when you have that kind of an audience in front of you and you're about to play Bach or Ravel, and you think, how are they going to relate to this kind of music? How? But, as musicians, we try and tell them the story, the narrative, the emotions behind. And what was really amazing to witness in person was actually how their faces started to soften. And I think living in that world, living in that circumstance, I think you had to put on some sort of a face, some sort of a mask to protect yourself. And in that moment, I saw them take off that mask. I saw them being who they really were on the inside. And I saw that it was the power of music that did it. So for me, that was a really, really eye-opening experience. And honestly, you go, at least that my first time, you go into that kind of situation thinking you are offering them the experience. You're offering them the grace and the love of music and the beauty of music. And you're offering them that privilege. But in fact, I felt like I was the one who gained so much more from that experience, maybe more than them, coming out of it feeling so renewed in my mission to do what I do through this medium of cello. And I almost felt selfish, really. I just felt like, gosh, I think I've gained more than them. But that was a really, really, truly life-changing experience.
Could you talk a little bit more about what it was exactly that you feel you received? Because on one hand, there is the sense that, yeah, maybe the work that I'm doing as a musician does matter, right? And of course, I think we all want that in some respect to matter. But I think that what we actually receive from this audience is perhaps even a little bit more than that. And I wonder if there's anything else that comes to mind. Like, what did you really walk away with?
Well, it's just that witnessing that transformation on their expression it's not something that we experience in a normal concert hall. You receive the praise and the applause and all that, and that's of course very nice. But when you actually see the transformation, when you actually see so real that this music is affecting them, so much so that at the Q&A they would start to open up about their life. They would say things like, "Your music made me think about why I was in here in the first place," or "You made me think about the daughter I haven't seen in X number of years." That's real. That's transformative.
Mm-hmm. The really amazing human rights lawyer Brian Stevenson, in his book Just Mercy, Brian Stevenson works very closely with people on death row, and he'll say often, imagine being judged for the rest of your life for what you may or may not have done on the very worst day of your life. And so imagine being defined for the rest of your life by the mistake you made. And I bring this back to Dominic's story about Bach and the regret he must have felt for not being at his wife's side, or the regret that we may all feel, which is such a human feeling. And in a sense, I feel like what begins to happen is a literal recognition, a re-knowing, a recognition of oneself in the light of the music, not only for the audience, but for ourselves too. And we talked a little bit early on about this idea of social entrepreneurship. I'm very lucky to run a nonprofit organization and learn how to be entrepreneurial about that, whether that comes to learning how to build a staff or learning how to fundraise. But actually, I feel like the roots of entrepreneurialism was something that I was actually taught as a young Suzuki violinist, because I think, in a sense, entrepreneurship is the practice of self-evolution. And Dominic, I want to pass this question to you, because you wear many, many hats in the world, but you're also the piano lead and forgive me if I get the title wrong, but business lead for an amazing organization called Tone Base, which is an online community. You're a very entrepreneurial person. You've also been part of Street Symphony for many years now. But I wonder how you connect your artistic practice with entrepreneurship in the world.
I mean, that's a great question, and that's something that certainly was not necessarily taught explicitly to me by any one person. It's really, I would say, entrepreneurship is really something that you get inspired by watching others just in their day-to-day lives taking the initiative to do something that will make a difference themselves. So in other words, not waiting around for someone else to take that first step. So whether it's, Vijay taking that first step for Street Symphony, taking that first step into that prison, saying yes to something that scares you, saying yes to something that just isn't unknown. That's something that certainly is a principle that I've been lucky to have mentors that inspired in me, parents that have inspired that in me, but really that's essentially what it boils down to, I would say. So if there is something that you're curious about, don't wait around for someone else to show you the way. You should embark on that journey yourself, make lots of mistakes, learn from them, stay humble, and more.
Yeah, and that actually is a very, you kind of play the instrument that way too. You perform that way as well. Can you connect that to your artistic practice? Like, the very almost boring, perhaps unsexy work of practicing, and how that connects to preparing you for perhaps the unknown, for taking that first step into the void.
Absolutely. So, as artists, it can be very, very easy for us to have lots of wires that get crossed all the time. I mean, our brains, I can't imagine what they look like when we're playing our instruments. They must be just, like the galaxy or something with stars everywhere. But one thing for me that's really important, like any journey, any, exploration, you got to have the tools for the job. You got to get ready. You got to get sometimes a survival pack. There's a few pieces that we play that are quite a journey. And for me, that's really a component that I apply to all aspects of my life. And I think probably, all three of us can have different versions of that. What I mean to say is that when I sit down at the instrument and I start practicing, start working on something, it's very easy to get overwhelmed by the emotion, the artistry, all these different factors that actually overstimulate you. And sometimes you just gotta, just get the notes together. I mean, as a pianist, we're dealing with thousands of notes all the time, probably the most notes of any instrument, and really building things layer by layer, so that way you can trust that a lot of the inspiration, a lot of the fire, the passion, that will come down the road, but come at the time when you're ready for it. When you've got the tools, the equipment to actually activate that fire, to allow the fire to build in a controlled way, and to really illuminate all of our colleagues that we're playing.
So you actually kind of compartmentalize things when you're preparing, right? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because the other thing that's part of your life as a pianist that's worth mentioning is that you don't travel with the instrument strapped to your back the way that Yoshi and I do, right? So sometimes you're playing on an 88-key piano, sometimes you're playing on a 44-key electric piano plugged into an amplifier, right? So how do you think about musical intention when the literal instrument you're playing on could change based on the venue you walk into?
Absolutely. I mean, we're so lucky today to be with this beautiful 9-foot Steinway, which is a real treat. But what is inspiring to me more so is, yes, having those 44 key MIDI keyboards where the sound is cutting out every once in a while because the amplifier is not working, but still being able to translate musical message, emotion, and intent through even that medium. And a lot of times it's those experiences where the equipment isn't really suited for the job, where you're making the best of a piano that sometimes half the notes don't work or something. But the fact that music, Bach, can still supersede that. People can still feel that message. That's when I realized that, as beautiful a concert hall as we are in right now, as beautiful a piano as we have right now, that's not necessary for the true essence of what these great geniuses meant. And for me, that's a deeply inspiring factor, indeed, because, we take music all over the place, and I do have this wonderful trust that the music is my guide. The music is my companion. I can actually trust the piece to guide me. I don't have to actually be the one pushing it along. A lot of times, we talk about this active listening. We listen together. We listen to where the piece moves, and actually, it's a very fulfilling, very satisfying ride, indeed. But of course, that does take a lot of rehearsing, a lot of getting to know each other, different personalities, and more. But yeah, I mean, for me, anything that has a key that makes sound is an inspiring place to be, to share the music that I love.
There's a couple of things coming to my mind. One is that, it's really important for us to remember that although we're so lucky to make music in halls like this, that music wasn't always made in concert halls. The concert hall is a relatively new construct when it comes to where music happens. And a lot of the music that we're performing for you all tonight is, it's called chamber music. It was meant to happen in chambers. And, the music of Felix Mendelssohn, who we're performing tonight, this music would have been as worthy of being performed in someone's living room as it was of being performed in a concert hall like this. And in a sense, a lot of these composers were very aware of their intention, of their why, of their audience. They knew that they were writing for a very specific person in the room, to bring something alive in that person. And in a sense, just bringing it back for a moment to the art of the hymn, one of the really beautiful things about this program and playing this program in Skid Row several times was that sometimes people in our audience would recognize the hymn tunes. So for example, in the Mendelssohn that we're going to be playing tonight, there's a tune that goes ba da da dee da 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 dee da da, right? Which, when we played at the Downtown Women's Center in Skid Row, someone said, "Oh yeah, that's the doxology." Right? And you immediately know that, this woman who I saw as being homeless, as being other, may have had a life completely different than what her appearance is, right? And in a sense, that's the great gift that we get back as musicians, right, is to see this. But also to just be aware of the fact that wherever we are, the work of the musician is to make something come alive in our audience, as well as alive in ourselves. And you're such a gifted educator and a teacher, and I know that you have perhaps somewhat a slightly differing approach to what Dominic just described in terms of how you bring something alive in yourself or in a student, which is that you really say that, actually the technique and the emotion has to happen hand in hand. And I'm just curious if you can maybe lean into that, and perhaps someplace where you might disagree with Dominic a little bit about maybe not compartmentalization, but maybe something closer to integration.
Yeah. And, mad respect to Dominic first, though. And, that's the beauty of art, isn't it? And there's always so many ways of approaching it and refining art.
That we can actively disagree with each other, but still make music together. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, I wish they could just, hone in into listening into our rehearsals, because it's not always very nice. But, I think I approach it a little bit differently to Dominic. I think when we practice something, which is whether it's a difficult shift or a very noodly passage that you're trying to master, if we take out music at any point, I feel like we're going down a very dangerous path, especially for students. And so we are creatures of habit. ultimately, I feel. And so if you practice something in a certain way, we're going to remember that. It's going to become a habit. So if you practice something with just the sole intention of nailing that note, and without...
Could you actually demonstrate for us? I'll hold the mic for you. Like, what do you mean by this?
So, yeah. So if you just, for example, if one is playing this shift, but you have trouble getting it, if you just practiced it trying to get it without thinking about what it meant in the musical, like maybe it meant, maybe it's a very openly expressive moment, but if you had practiced, you got the note, but you've practiced it in the completely wrong gesture. And as creatures of habit, you're going to remember that more than anything else in a performance, because when you're under pressure, whatever you're used to is going to creep back out.
So what do you keep in your mind when you're practicing that kind of helps you embody that intention? Are you imagining your audience? Are you imagining how you want them to feel? Are you thinking about the composer? How do you do that?
Interesting. I mean, there's obviously many ways, but one of the ways I think is really important is actually to be constantly being sensitive to intervals. You know, so for example, if you have a major third, sorry, minor third, but then you have a major third, there's hope already in that interval. I mean, to not get numb to that sort of things. Or if it's a perfect fifth going up, there's a sense of openness and freedom. Maybe there's a sense of closure, maybe there's a sense of conclusion. I mean, there's a very sort of golden rule, sort of thumb, and of course there's always going to be many exceptions.
And places where that may not be true.
Yes.
Yeah. But so you're constantly, it feels like, but both of you are kind of saying the same thing, but in different ways, is that you're trying to open yourself up to as many possibilities as possible, right? And so in a sense that actually when we're practicing and we're trying to, say, nail the notes, or we're trying to understand the intervals, that we are also keeping ourselves open to the moment where inspiration might strike, or something might happen, or we're in the heat of a performance together. We kind of have a saying among us where it's like 1 + 1 + 1 doesn't equal 3, it equals 10 or 1,000, right? Where there's all these almost infinite possibilities of what we could do in real time. So maybe we could kind of end our time here by talking about what it means to offer something to an audience, right? How to prepare ourselves, how to prepare as a group, but how to meet our audience with the intention that we're all co-creating something together, you know? And yes, you know, we do play quote-unquote classical music where the notes are written down on the page, but in a sense, the notes are just a symbol pointing at what happens between us, right? So how do we go from the granular detail of trying to learn the notes on our page and trying to convince our bodies to do that, and then to offer something truly transcendent to our audience? It's a huge question, but I'm just curious if we can circle around it for a little bit.
Yeah, maybe I can start very briefly. You know, for me, it's really inspiring, particularly as an arranger, to arrange different types of pieces, whether it's the Nutcracker, whether it's the Chaconne, and more, for my colleagues here. Because for me, this is a very intimately human experience where I'm writing music for people that I know, and I know their strengths plus strengths. There's no weaknesses here. and you know, that really allows them to almost be their best selves. And a lot of times I feel that, you know, when we bring something to an audience, whether it's a concert hall, whether it's a shelter, a prison, and more, you can only be your truest self, your most honest self. You can't be certainly trying to imitate someone else, because people can read through that in just a second, really. And one thing that I do think is, you know, very powerful that we do is we bring music that's never pandering. It's never music that is just overly simple. We bring music that we believe in strongly at our core, whether it's the music of Charles Ives, whether it's the music of Bach, Mendelssohn, Petrus Vasks, Piazzolla, and more. And that sort of respect that we have for whoever's listening to us is very important. And in addition, as a pianist, as someone that has a million keys and kind of able to play anything at the piano, one of the things I take very seriously is requests. So when an audience member, for example, makes a request, like, can you play this song? Can you play that song? For me, that's not a trivial thing. That's actually them really being as vulnerable as they possibly can in a room that might be very tough. They are basically saying what they like. And if we look at any middle school situation or even high school, it can be a little scary to share with people what you're interested in because it exposes you a little bit. So I do think that when we meet our audience in that respect as well, when they request something and we can play that for them, I do think that's one way of letting them feel heard. And certainly if I don't know the piece, write it down, add it to the long list of great music that I need to learn or I need to play next time and more. But those are just a few examples of, again, how we try to meet our audience in the best way possible.
Yeah, so for me, it's sort of going off what I was just talking about a few moments earlier, which is, sort of being aware, super hypersensitive to intervals, and that really leads to just having musical intention consistently, right? So I think for us, we have to bring these dots and lines to life. And the beauty of music is that I could think of a thought or an emotion while interpreting something, but it could be received so completely differently by the audience. That's the beauty of music. We're not bound by lyrics, and it can be interpreted in any way you capture, and that's the magic. And so for me, I think if I commit to something, that's the important part. You commit to something, and you try and just share that intention with the audience. They're gonna feel it, and they're gonna respond back. And I think that energy is real. And we've witnessed it in the state hospital when we played this exact piece, the Bach, and I don't think many people knew that piece, but remember that guy in the back who said, yeah, this music made me think about my family. And when
His daughter's wedding.
His daughter's wedding, was it? Yeah. And so when this kind of foreign music to them already finds sort of relevance in their lives, can you imagine how much more, if we increase that kind of experience for them, how much more they can become, I don't know, more in touch with who they really were.
And at the same time, the word that's coming to mind for me is resonance, right? That even though this person may have never heard a violin before, or they may find Bach foreign to them, what's actually being created between us is the space of resonance. And the space of resonance is both a reciprocal and mutual place of vibration, right? Because as you said early on in our conversation, so beautifully, Yoshi, is that we often feel like we're walking out of these spaces having received the gift, right? And so I opened part of our conversation today with this idea that, or this challenge to us, that how do we meet the world in its needs? And I wonder if it's also about meeting the parts of ourself that need practice, that need attunement, that need correction, that need to be darshan, that need to be seen, right? And so the way that we think about practice, capital P practice, at Darshan or at Street Symphony or in our lives, is that the way in which we practice on ourselves is the way in which we practice in the world, right? And that in a sense, it's almost like there's two altars, right? There's the altar of your attention, there's the altar of the audience, but there's also the altar of yourself, right? And there's the literal auditam, right? The literal listening to oneself and to one another and to the space that exists between us, where beauty or transcendence or healing or hope can be practiced, right? And perhaps I'll kind of leave us with this idea that I think despair is a very seductive emotion, right? I think that there's a lot happening in our world that beckons us into a place of outrage. And there are things that we should absolutely be outraged about. And at the same time, as T.S. Eliot said, we are distracted by distraction until we are even further distracted, right? So we're living a life in which our attention, that sacred quality of attention, is being continuously pulled away from us, saying, care about me, care about me, care about me. And many of these things have to be deeply cared about, and at the same time, we're not feeding that part of ourself that keeps burning out because we care about so many things. So I actually see practice as an act of self-repair, right? And it's a place where we can actually take care, pay attention, invest, and recognize, re-know ourselves so that we can show up to the world more full, more whole, hoping that the world can practice that too along with us. And so in that way, we're so grateful to be here. We're so grateful to have had this conversation with you all. Please do follow us on social media to continue this conversation, to be part of what the Darshan Trio does. You can find us at Street Symphony, at darshan.trio. Both, Yoshi, Dominic, and myself, we are all very active and would love to continue this conversation with you all. I would like to say to you all that I've actually written a book about everything that we've talked about today called Restrung that is coming out on June 9th. It's being published by Da Capo Press. It's about the origin story of Street Symphony and much of this conversation that we've had together about bringing music into shelters, clinics, county jails. And the truth is, a lot of what we've talked about today is really heavy stuff, right? You're not expected to go out there and start a nonprofit to, quote unquote, help the homeless right now. But I do think that there's so much in our world in which we are invited to pay attention to the world. So if you're so moved, go volunteer at a local shelter. Talk to your professors. If you're a student, if you're lucky enough to be a student of Yoshi, talk to him about how you can get involved with your community, how you can show up to the world in need and to the part of yourself that is in need at the same time by diving into your own artistic practice. So we've been the Darshan Trio. Thanks so much for being here. We look forward to seeing you very soon.
Thank you.